Ed has said that he would welcome a Q&A.
You see me struggling to maintain my balance. Well, I've lost most of my eyesight, and as I have been told by specialists, your eyes are a great part of your sense of balance. And I remember I just saw an account of a woman in Brooklyn. In fact, I heard it on NPR. A celebrity was talking about his mother, and his mother was a good Jewish mother who loved her family and loved to cook and liked to serve the community. But in her 90th year, she said to her son, because she no longer had these great feasts that she had served earlier, she said, "You know, when you were 90 years old, you can't see, you can't drive, you can't walk, and you can't eat anything. And it is wonderful." It is. It can be one of the most beautiful and productive and meaningful parts of one's life. So grow old gracefully and gratefully. I have lost most of my eyesight, but I believe and hope I have lost none of my vision.
Thank you. So, taking a lesson from Phil Donahue, I imagine people remember them, we have a microphone that can come to you. So are there people that have questions that they would like Ed to respond to? Herr Dr. Schumann.
Yes, thank you very much. Ed, Joe Schumann here. As I mentioned to you earlier, Ed, I think I'm the only colleague here who actually had the privilege and joy of actively overlapping with you in our National Council and knowing you.
The brightest and best jewel in our leadership.
Is that right? Thank you so very, very much. I was not fishing for a compliment, but I actually...
No one has served as long, as usefully, and as intelligently as you. You have been our model of social action, and you are our philosopher, our real thinking philosopher.
Right.
And I mean it, Joe.
Thank you so very much, Ed. Believe me, I was not fishing for a compliment, but I do want to be biographical and sort of reverse the direction here. One thing that I certainly admired and recalled, and I think we see elements of that in the talk that you gave, is that you spoke the ethical word and moral conviction with extraordinary power. And you have been a gripping orator, which I think has virtually no parallel in our modern movement. And I just want to thank you for that. And I admired that greatly in you, as well as other things. But I have a question that is biographical to you, and I want you to correct my memory if I'm wrong. With the exception of Algernon Black, I think you are the only ethical leader who is actually investigated by the FBI. And I suspected that when you told the story, you had, although you're very self-effacing and very reserved in many ways, I detected a little bit of quiet joy in being able to relate that. It was during the Vietnam War when you were very outspoken, as Amanda had mentioned, and you had basically said the FBI had done some covert investigation about your critique of the war in Vietnam, and these are my words, not yours, I'm paraphrasing, and you went on to say, those dopes, all they had to do was walk into the Washington Ethical Society and pick up copies of my platform addresses that were on the literature table, and they could very well know what my position was. They didn't have to waste taxpayer money doing covert investigations. My question is, do I have that story right?
You have it almost right.
Almost, okay.
The FBI had investigated me as early as my college years because I was supposed to be the organizer of a communist cell at Stetson University here in Florida because I had actively supported desegregation and voting rights for black people, and therefore I must be a communist. The head of the history department, who was one who pushed me forward thinking I would be a professor of history someday, told me that this had happened, and he had listened as a very right-wing member of the faculty, the dean of men, in fact, who was very hard of hearing and spoke in a very loud voice, so you could hear him half a mile away, told the investigating agent that he understood I led a communist group of students at Stetson University. I'm sure my portfolio has grown. I have never checked it out. But the incident you talk about was not the FBI, which had a legal right to inquire. It was the CIA, which at that time illegally spied on some 14 Washington-based organizations. And because it was illegal and was exposed, Vice President Rockefeller was commissioned to make a study of what had been done covertly by the CIA to engage in espionage against our American people. The Rockefeller report, which is a printed report that thick, tells the story. And when Rockefeller announced this to the public, it was electric. It was a front page story. The Washington Post was most interested in that story. I had moved already to New York, and I was sitting in the living room of Horace Freese and his wife, Ruth, who was the youngest daughter of Felix Adler. And our conversation was interrupted by a telephone call. Ruth answered the phone and said, "There's someone here who wants to speak with you. The society told them you were visiting here." It was a reporter from the Washington Post, and he said, "The Rockefeller report was rendered today." I said, "Yes, I heard that on the news." He said, "Did you know you are in it?" I said, "No." "Well, you were one of those, and the leader of one of those organizations which was spied upon illegally by the CIA, and we want to make a major story. We would like your comment." I thought I would like to be in that paper. But there are a lot of other people who will make, "Oh, you know, this is terrible, this is tragic, this is overwhelming, we're about to go down in flames." Okay, it was serious, but I decided to make another tact. They're going to be very serious and viewing with alarm. I'm going to spoof the whole thing. So I made that comment that they had indeed planted an asset, as they are called, to report on all the activities of the society and make a report. The written account consisted almost entirely of quotes from my addresses. So I said to the reporter, it was really a waste of government resources to put an asset in the society when they could have purchased any one of my addresses for 15 cents. But I appreciate the contribution that they made. I trust that this asset made a good pledge. We needed the money. And I got in the story. You're right, Joe. I do want to say one other thing about people who, I in fact, was under suspicion for criticizing the U.S. attempt to overthrow the Castro regime in Cuba. I condemned from the platform the Bay of Pigs invasion and our efforts to drive Cuba into the hands of the Soviet Union, which we did. But the war in Vietnam proceeded, and I had worked for many years on behalf of the conscientious objectors, Amanda said I had changed my course from originally wanting to be a teacher of history to being a religious leader, a liberal religious leader, emphasizing social action. Actually, I did not make that choice. The state of Florida, the legislature of Florida, made that choice for me. I was at Stetson University. The head of the history department, Gilbert Lycan, who was from Yale, trained under Bemis, one of the great historians, became my mentor. For whatever reasons, he thought I was a very exceptional student of history. The political science professor, Mr. Gamber, told me that he had had 3 outstanding students in his career, and he had a long career. And I was the 3rd. And he pushed me to get a PhD in history. And on his recommendation and Dr. Lycan's, I applied when I took my master's in history to enter either Yale or the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And that summer, I was accepted by both for a PhD program in history. My love is history. I've always been a historian. I never abandoned that. I just took it with me. But that was the beginning of the McCarthy period. I was registered as a conscientious objector, though earlier the conscientious objectors were not being conscripted. It was just a registration. But when McCarthyism began to take hold, and even before McCarthy, there were the loyalty oaths instituted by the Truman administration. Quakers were dismissed from schools and colleges if they objected to taking an oath of loyalty, because Quakers don't take oaths. Distinguished professors at the University of California were dismissed because in that state there was a great outcry of right-wing hysteria against so-called leftist teachers. I knew enough history to know that among the last remnants of the people who stood up against the Nazis were a group of liberal clergymen, Martin Niemöller in particular, who had been a U-boat chief and a submarine commander during the First World War and was a decorated hero of Germany, who had become a Lutheran minister. And he was one of the outstanding people whose career was such that even Hitler did not dare touch him for a number of years. Finally, he went to a concentration camp. But people like Niemöller had taught me that the pulpit could be an outstanding and unique point of protest if the country were going in a totalitarian direction. And in the McCarthy period, a period at least as ugly as, it was worse than we have now, believe me. People were losing their job and being blacklisted. The state of Florida, in a benign moment, passed a piece of legislation that anyone who had declined to serve in the armed forces would not be allowed to teach a school in Florida, and any institution, public or private, who accepted even $1 of contribution from the state could not have in its staff an objector to military service. Well, I was registered as a conscientious objector, and I was not going to hide my light under a bushel. So I did not decide to be a minister. I had debated which I wanted to be when I was in high school, a humanist minister, not a theologically minded, clergyman, but a socially active, the social gospel, if you will. I was still on the fence, but decided for history, because I knew my great love and probably my best ability was as a teacher. But that summer when I was getting finishing my master's degree, the state of Florida decided that I should be a humanist minister. Questions and answers? Where'd our moderator go? Oh, there he is.
I'm right here.
Hi, Ed. My name is Linda Napoli. I'm from the Ethical Humanist Society of Long Island, and I'm so honored to meet you. I think you're a hero. My question is, you've lived through a number of tumultuous eras in our nation, and thinking about what's happening today, what's your opinion in terms of how bad is it compared to before?
Oh my God, it's so dark that I would discourage you all if I told you all that I think. We are faced with a number of crises, a number of tormenting issues all at one time. Climate change. We are ruining our planet, and we don't have much time to correct it. We see the rise of white nationalism. We see tribalism, religious tribalism, in which you chop off people's heads if they don't agree with your point of view. Muslims killing Muslims because they are not orthodox enough, because they are not primitive enough. This madness, it's in Europe, and the new nationalism that is throughout European society and American society. And we're being taught to hate people who are different from us in color or culture. That is the crisis we face. We face the unspoken crisis in education. We are dumbing down our educational systems enormously. A few of the schools are the best schools in the world, but they are the privileged schools. The people who are in the ghetto and the poor whites, their schools teach very little. And every poll shows that more Americans are willing to accept would welcome a military government because they think it would be stronger. That is a growing thing. And our young people, by and large, are showing in every test that they are more and more ignorant of our history as a people. You have to understand our history. You have to understand the American experience, the things we've lived through, the struggles we have made to reach whatever level of democracy we've achieved. And we're losing it because we are allowing a generation and new generations to be ignorant of who they are and what they must do to be a free people. I know that a number of times I've encountered people who say, well, I don't need to remember all that history. I don't need to know about the labor movement or the rise of this or that, because I can always look it up on the internet, or we can ask Alexa. Well, Alexa doesn't put anything in your brains except factoids. If you don't know how to organize them, if you don't know what they mean, it's meaningless. The dumbing down of America is such that if we go down this path, we will become a nation of amazingly stable geniuses who are so smart that we don't need to know anything. So we really have to turn around as a people. And you and I have to be the people who do it.
One more question.
Hi, my name is Troy, in the back here. And I'm really new here, so I've known about the Ethical Culture Society for about 6 months now. And I heard you talk about the 90-hour work weeks. And, and what I wanted to ask you is, in that environment, especially doing really stressful work that can sometimes feel like a constant uphill battle, how often did you hit empty? And when you did, how did you refuel? What was your strategy for being able to get back into it and to have this lifelong service?
Be careful, Ed. Troy is considering applying for leadership training, so just before you answer.
First, about the 90-hour week. The New York Society faced a financial crisis in the time when I was there, and had to cut enormously its staff. There were 4 full-time leaders when I went there. For some time, I was the only one. But everyone fought to maintain the same level, the same programs that they'd had before. And I was working 90 hours a week. The board of the society decided it was time to have an in-depth study. So they got 2 experts to come in and evaluate the efficiency with which the staff was doing its job. Mr. and Mrs. Lamb, their names. And they studied intensively. They talked to various members. They looked at what we were doing. And they came to me and said, you know, you say you work 90 hours a week, and we doubted that. We thought you were exaggerating, but as we have measured your activities and documented your activities, we are convinced you do work 90 hours a week. But the members of the society will never believe that. So we are going to say you work 70 hours a week. We're going to say that the time you research and prepare your addresses is on your own time. So I guess I'm a guy who just works 70 hours a week. Fortunately, Frederick Unger, who had insisted on publishing a book based on my radio talks, Sunday platform addresses, of what was happening at the time of the rise of the radical right. Unger said to me after the publication of that first book, Ed, I will publish any book you write. I want you to write books. So at the age of 55, I resigned as the active leader from the active leadership. I became a leader in another form, the written word. And how did I refuel myself? I didn't. To tell you the truth, I had burned out at age 55. I renewed myself by sitting down in the quiet of my hometown and wrote 4 books. And by the way, I was not wasting my time. Those books have been perhaps the best extension, the most rewarding part of my ethical mission. Does that answer your question? You can burn yourself out. Teachers regularly burn themselves out. And we did not have the time off that we needed. Felix Adler always guarded his time carefully, and the result is seen in his work.
Thank you, Ed, and thank you so much for being here, for accepting our award, and for a life of service. So thank you all for coming out for this.